Hello, this is your host Akhil Navluri, and welcome to the brand new episode of the TechoSpace podcast series. In this podcast episode, I'm super thrilled and honored to welcome one of the most eminent and prominent industry leader, having 20 years of experience in the Microsoft company, Mr. Mark Kashman, who happens to be the Chief Extra Zone Officer for the company, KashBox LLC, and also very recently he has joined as a principal Microsoft 365 consultant for Pyramaxis Consulting, and he's based out of Seattle, Washington, the USA. So, Mark, it gives me an absolute and a supreme pleasure to welcome you to this podcast initiative of mine. So, Mark, how are you doing and how are things in Seattle at the moment?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the nice warm welcome and really nice to chat with you very much across the world, which I love about technology. It's always fun to have people in person shaking hands, but it's also nice to be able to connect with some of those places for you and me that might be a little bit hard to travel to or it takes a little bit.
No.
So thank you for having me on the podcast and congratulations on your podcast effort all up. I have also been a podcaster, so I know the joy that it brings. So
Oh,
congratulations.
so there's a podcast thing twining here then.
That's right. Well, it was about 7 years. I had a podcast called The Intrazone. And
Okay,
with some of the new work that I'm doing, maybe I'm thinking about starting a new podcast as well.
amazing. I wish you good luck for that in advance.
Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. All right then. So at the stroke of this hour, which is 9:10 a.m. Melbourne time, let's kick off with the podcast session. All
Ready.
right, Mark. So, can you give me and our listeners a complete timeline of your journey in the IT industry?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for a little over 2 decades, so 20 years. And a lot of that time was spent at Microsoft as an employee. And I worked on a lot of different things. To get into the door, I really started to focus on training. So a lot of the internal field sellers, people that were selling product direct to customers, technical oriented people, solutions oriented people. And my team was in charge of building all the training for them. Really, anytime Microsoft created something new or a big change or a big product announcement, I was focused on making sure that the internal people knew how to talk about it externally. And off of that, one of my internal customers actually became one of my first managers when I became a product manager for the first time. And that
Okay.
was within the SharePoint realm. So if you know and love SharePoint, I've been in that
Yeah.
space for quite some time, and I've stepped through a couple of different roles. I worked for a little bit of time in the services industry within Microsoft, so Microsoft Consulting Services, and we were building a really fun product on top of SharePoint called the Interactive Media Manager, which for
Okay.
me was the first exposure of the depth of how you can build on top of SharePoint. It feels like that's a rhythm now, all these new applications that are built on top of SharePoint.
Mhm.
And then for a very long time, I was the SharePoint online product manager. And
Mhm.
I get one claim to fame. I was the first product manager to focus on
Oh,
SharePoint
wow.
Online, the move to the cloud. And then I went through a lot of things through launching new applications like Office Delve, Office 365 Video, which is now Stream, Microsoft Lists, and all the great things that SharePoint did within itself with the big modern intranet push. And just recently, beyond Microsoft, I'm now doing a little bit of my own thing, but I just literally 2 days ago, or 2 days as of now, joined a company called Sympraxis Consulting, which, no surprise, builds a lot of specific custom solutions for their customers, oftentimes leveraging SharePoint, and that's where I fit in as a consultant now, focused on making people appreciate and use and take advantage of the SharePoint investment they already have.
Amazing. So, I mean, in the conversation, you just mentioned a point called interactive media manager. If my listeners would just like to know about it, what exactly is this particular thing?
Yeah, so think about a company that's just a very large media company. I can't name the names, but if you turn on your television and you go to a channel that has your favorite TV show on, they have
Mhm.
some method of getting from script to screen, and everything in between. A lot of that is to do with the state and the status of the project, the film, the TV show, the documentary, and so there's a lot of different assets. There's the script. There's the poster, there's of course the film and the movie itself,
Yeah.
and then there's all the trailers and everything.
Yeah.
So if SharePoint is this nice content service and can house a lot of different types of content, the interactive media manager, through a really advanced at the time element of metadata that was more semantic based. So you could infer a lot of relationships between the script, the director list, the actors, the posters, the images that they were going to put on IMDb. There was just a whole host of assets that go along with a particular movie, a lot. And then they have
Okay.
all the versions of the movies. If they have one in English, they of course are going to have it dubbed in Spanish, Italian, French, Japanese. So
Yeah.
Interactive Media Manager, the goal was for it to articulate and help organize all of that through each state. So at the end release, there would be a lot of assets, and the Interactive Media Manager they would go and actually push those files to the various people that would need it. They would work on it, finalize, let's say, the big poster that's going to get pushed out worldwide, and then
Hmm.
those people are going to take it and change the text and do all that. So some of them were Photoshop files, some of them were .mov files, some of them were just regular documents, and there was just a lot to coordinate. So anyway, it was built on top of SharePoint, but it
Hmm.
also interacted with a lot of other systems to distribute content worldwide at scale.
That's a perfect explanation. I mean, really, that's beautiful. I mean, I just got to know about the excellence about the interactive media manager with SharePoint. I mean, after a while, I'll ask you more about SharePoint, but not quickly enough. So before I head on for that, I just wanted to understand, Mark, how did your 20 years experience in Microsoft company, cement shape you into that eminent industry leader that you are now?
Well, it's a high praise that you might be giving me more than I deserve, but I appreciate it. After you have been around SharePoint for a little while, it it doesn't scare you anymore. So there's a number of things that SharePoint 101 or when you first touch it, it feels a little foreign. It's not quite like all the other products that are meant to be really user focused. It was originally designed as a tool for IT to help manage sites and portals and content management and all of that. But yeah, after you spend a couple of years with it, and of course, working with the engineering team and getting to know what the customer feedback is and what partners then do to extend it and make more of it than what it is out of the box, you do start to get a sense of what it is this thing is. You get a better sense of how to talk about it. One of my favorite things of having been a product manager, whether it's SharePoint or not, is I like to show the product. So you get to do a lot of demos, and the fun part about being within Microsoft when I was there was you got to show things for the first time. So not only was it cool, if you like the technology, but it really was the first time people were seeing the whatever next Microsoft was working on. So
Okay.
cut to 20 years of doing that.
Yeah,
I
right. Yeah.
remember a lot. I've heard a lot. I've taken all the good and the bad feedback. And I've worked a lot with, customers, partners, and of course the engineering team. So as it morphed or the public wanted it to morph, it was a big learning curve. And over time, I, started to rack up a couple of career points being a SharePoint expert.
That's brilliant, Mark. Now, Mark, looking back at your Microsoft days, do you have any interesting, anecdote that you would like to share, or did you have a rendezvous with Mr. Bill Gates? You know.
I did have two rendezvous with Bill Gates. Just as a side, they're really quick. Uh, when we were doing the interactive media manager, his lead technician for all of his homes, so not at work but at his homes, his big house is over in Kirkland.
Okay.
Um, we were invited, me and one of our team leads, to come to the house and to basically assess their distribution system for the all the movies because he would have a lot of movies, and at the time they were ripping from DVDs onto his home server, the media server. And so they were leveraging Interactive Media Manager to help track his assets. I didn't
Okay.
get to meet him at that time, but I did get to go to his house and see a little bit of it from the inside, which was kind of fun. My other really, I wouldn't even say a meet and greet, but I did get to see him was when I was back in my training days, training all of the internal field sellers. It was my job in one of the bigger internal keynote events. It was my job to give him the cue to take the stage. So I had my headset on, I waited for the cue, and then I pointed at him, and then he
Oh,
took the
wow.
stage, and that's about it. That's my Bill Gates stories.
Yeah.
But in essence, the experience at Microsoft, whether it's with senior management or people who are in leadership positions or just my peers. It was a really good experience for me in the early days to just go from doing something very different. Before I was in technology, I did a little bit of film and television, and in my early days, I was a scuba instructor.
Okay.
So the curve into Microsoft had a little bit of a ramp because I didn't necessarily have I didn't have a computer science degree and I hadn't done it before. So
Mhm.
anything that I could learn and whomever I met was a positive one.
That's amazing. That's a beautiful journey. And yeah, and when you had that rendezvous with Bill Gates, like which year was that? And like was it in the early 2000s or 90s? Like when
Oh,
was
let's
that?
see. I started working as a vendor, so this would have been around 1998. So
Oh.
it's it kind of cheats even the 20 years. But I think it would have been around 2005 or 2006 when I was working on what was called the TSP Academy, which held and ran the event that he came and spoke at. He was already Bill Gates, and I can't even I'm putting myself from Bill under my desk. Uh, but I really was working as a program manager for all of the internal training, and it happened to be once a year we would bring everybody in to the campus, and of course Bill's office at the time was just down the street, just down the in the other part of campus.
I think, when you're talking about this, I feel if I just go into your shoes, I feel these are beautiful moments to cherish.
Yeah, oh gosh. It really is memorable, even if brief. Because you do remember sort of what the look and feel was and his reaction, and sometimes is almost his want and need to have a little bit of privacy so he could think. Of course, everybody wanted to say hi, but he was about to go on stage, and I had my walkie-talkie, and there was a lot to do. So it was brief. I've heard a lot of stories, of people meeting him or having meetings with him, and certainly at a higher level of actually getting things approved by him. Those are always fun stories, but mine were pretty simple and pretty brief. But when he was the lead of Microsoft, he definitely knew it, and he drove a pretty clear ship. And
Okay.
in succession, difference under Steve Ballmer. And then, of course, my last part of my tenure was under Satya Nadella. And all very different,
Okay.
but for me, all very good mostly.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's good to hear, Mark. Now, Mark, I wanted to understand now heading on to the SharePoint segment, if I would just like to put it across. So, Mark,
Ready.
according to you, like what is your take on the importance of the SharePoint ecosystem for the tech industry?
Yeah, the SharePoint ecosystem really is, I think, a first if you go back far enough, where a lot of at least from a Microsoft perspective, a lot of the products that they put out in the earlier days were very oriented around themselves. You had, of course, Windows, that's about the biggest ecosystem, but everything off of that was its individual product or program that did something specific. And of course, there is an element of SharePoint that does what it does. It has sites and lists and document libraries and all of that. But then the goal from when Jeff Teeper, who is really the lead engineer for forever for SharePoint, and of course he's been with Microsoft for I think 30 plus years, his goal was to consolidate a lot of the different efforts that were around project management and business intelligence and of course document management collaboration. So by nature of it, from its inception, it was always a little bit more than itself, and it always had an element where people could extend it. So for a developer, they could always, of course, make it look and feel and do what it needs to. But it also translated to, I think, your question, the ecosystem.
Yeah.
The ecosystem was a ton of partners that learned how
Mm.
SharePoint worked, learned some of the things that maybe Microsoft wasn't building themselves, and looking for different markets where they could play and make their offerings, some of which have been around for as long as SharePoint. You run into somebody in the ecosystem that has been working with SharePoint from Tahoe days, which is the 2001 launch of SharePoint,
Oh,
and all the way through. Everybody has a story about when they started with SharePoint within the ecosystem. But
okay.
I think it offers a lot of the how you can build on top of it as a platform that really is then that entry point for somebody in the ecosystem or a developer who just works for a specific company to make SharePoint a little bit more what it needs to be, not just what it is out of the box.
Absolutely. Now, Mark, I mean that I just get the understanding about the SharePoint. Now, Mark,
Mhm.
when SharePoint was floated across in 2001, how was it like? Was it like a basic thing? I mean, for me, SharePoint is like I just get the idea of it. When I started working in the IT industry, but when it started
Mhm.
in its in during the Genesis time, how was it like? Was it very not? I mean, was it very complex to use, or how was the thing like back then?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is for anybody that's listening and maybe doesn't quite know the history of SharePoint, the biggest difference is it really was never designed as an end user tool from a usability perspective.
Okay.
But the counter to that, even if it was a little bit more of a tool for IT, one of the original goals was for it to be a database for anyone, somebody that wasn't going to manage SQL or, had some needs that went above Excel. And even though a lot of people don't like to say that SharePoint is a database, a lot of people treat it like a database. But in its instance, when you actually had a new list, you effectively were managing data within a table, which effectively was kind of a UI element or user interface element in between the SharePoint user interface and what effectively was SQL on the back end. So, from an information database management perspective, it kind of started with some of those roots. But it also was a place where you could go and have a team site. You could go and have your company portal. And
Okay.
of course, off of that, you start to mix what the base components are with sites and pages and document libraries. That was all there from the early get-go.
Huh.
And over the various versions, of course, there was a lot added to it. The biggest contrast was, I think, in 2016, when usability really was a big focus. A lot of
Hmm.
people talk about it as modern SharePoint. And
Okay.
modern SharePoint has gotten even more modern, but the latest iterations are a little bit more oriented around AI and better search and a lot of things around how things can be portable and mobile and you know connected. I think the other last thing that I would say is almost back to your ecosystem question is there are so many things that are now their own products but are based on and relying on SharePoint. So Teams, when you're in a Microsoft Teams call like we are right now, if you're
Yeah.
in a Teams channel, the Files tab, that's SharePoint. When you create a new whiteboard, whiteboard is stored in SharePoint, a little thing called SharePoint Embedded, Microsoft Lists, Microsoft Loop, Office 365 Video, now Stream, all of that is stored in SharePoint. And it kind of is paints a picture of the evolution, because
Huh.
SharePoint has those roots and has always been very good at managing content, the broader content word. It makes it so that it's a good storage application that people then can build their own user interface. And sometimes that's a totally different product. But within the Microsoft
Yeah.
365 ecosystem of its own,
Hmm.
it's deeply connected. And a lot of the history of SharePoint is what has been built on SharePoint, in addition to how has SharePoint gotten better over the years.
That's a beautiful, beautiful insight on that. And I think I can, summarize it in a nutshell being, the modern SharePoint to the post-modern SharePoint. So it's like that kind of a timeline, which is really interesting to know and it rings a bell with me.
Yeah, and if you see a classic site or a classic list or a classic library, you immediately know. But if you put your brain, way in the way back, that is what it was, and it really wasn't something that anybody, once IT set it up, it really was for anybody within the company to take advantage of, to create their own site, to store their own documents, to manage the life cycle of things. And that was pretty unique. There were of course competitors, but
Mhm.
the way that it evolved with competition and of course within Microsoft itself, it has
Yeah.
been a very long-standing product. And I think the team behind it has done a lot of nice work to keep it so that it's relevant,
Yeah.
in addition to that it's complementary to the rest of the portfolio.
That's amazing to know, Mark. Now, Mark, like what were the key initiatives that were, laid out by you in coming up with and, designing the robust intranets?
Yeah, so just to be very clear and frank, I was mostly on the marketing side. So
Okay.
a lot of what I get to claim as, whether I did it or we did it, the we at the time when I was within Microsoft, a lot of it was in that era. I joined the SharePoint team in 2007, and it really was the first push to the cloud. So that there was that. The
Okay.
big milestone of just making the cloud viable. When people look at the push to the cloud with SharePoint Exchange, what was Link Server, which is then became Skype, which is now Teams, the push was get everybody off of on premises, but also have full rich capabilities. And those were kind of lean years where there wasn't the full rich capability in the cloud. Now it's the opposite. There's more capabilities in the cloud. So I think one of the claims was just being a part of that, working with my colleagues across Exchange and Link, and coordinating what is this business productivity online suite that became Office 365 that is now Microsoft 365. Um, the other push for me was just the pure modernization of SharePoint. There was a lot of feedback from our end users, or now their end users, that were basically just saying it's not for me. It's, don't make it look like, if we can redesign it, can we make it not look like SharePoint? I have to spend too much time training my people on it because they don't get it. And now it is a lot more intuitive and easier to use. So there was the modernization of SharePoint that I, of course, was a part of, but there was significant work on the engineering side. Um, the other is kind of what we already mentioned a little bit. I got to be the product manager of some of the unique apps that Microsoft built on top of SharePoint. So I helped launch Office Delve. I helped bring to market pretty holistically as their sole marketer for Microsoft Lists, which
Okay.
was a lot of fun demos, a ton of blogs, a really fun launch moment. Um, and what we do a little bit with OneDrive, or now what is Microsoft OneDrive. I had a little bit of time where I was the OneDrive product manager,
Oh.
and because of everything we've been talking about, it should not be a big surprise, but OneDrive is built on top of SharePoint. So that fit within what I was doing. So those are kind of my bigger contributions and milestones. And a lot of what my job was as a marketer was to market and help with the product launches, but also to land it so that there was good adoption, that there was good awareness when we would be at events. There was good feedback mechanisms for people who were trying things out and letting us know, and getting all that back into the engineering team. So that was always the year-round effort, was what did people think and how can we adjust it over time? And they've always been really good with that. The thing that's changed is it's now always continuous innovation and continuous feedback, where back in 2007 it was a little bit more version to version, so it was a 3-year cycle. Now it's very different.
Hmm. I know. I mean, that completely explains. And I'm just completely like in awe of this fact that when you're just talking more about your expertise and talking more about your portfolio, I'm like, wow, that was like a huge. That was like a beautiful timeline indeed.
Well, the part that always kind of just, if you take a step back from anything any of us do, those are the things that I considered were my portfolio. But then I would look across the aisle and in different buildings, and of course with different companies, and the portfolios, depending on how broad you go, especially when you look at the Microsoft portfolio, there are so many things that I had nothing to do with, and that's not a
Okay.
surprise, right? But when you think of the Power Platform and everything that they do, when you think of Azure and everything they do, and when you think of all the business
Yep.
dynamics, and there's so many things, and that's just Microsoft. Then you think of, what about Google and Oracle, and
A
there's so many
lot of
things
things. Yeah.
in the industry. It's almost mind-boggling when you think of what is the world's technology portfolio and all the choices you have to make. It's a lot, and so I was really happy to be a part of what is considered my portfolio, my historical one, but also in awe of what it is that the company, when I was with them, what they did really as the whole. And I think one thing, that if you've never listened to one of the public calls where they have the earnings call, it is just that. It's talking about the successes and where the areas that didn't maybe do so well. But it's also a reminder of everything. If you have interest in Microsoft, everything that Microsoft is doing, from Xbox, gaming, consumer, commercial, cloud, developer, just it's a lot. And obviously, it's like any other company. There are things that are good, and there are things that are, needing a little bit more of a push, or maybe they go away. but I think always they had a good track record. So within my little area of portfolio, we had a decent track record as well, and so I'm pleased to have been a part of it.
That's fantastic, Mark. So, Mark, you just were telling me that in 2007, that was the time where people were moving to cloud. But was there any initial hesitance from all the organizations from moving from the data servers all the way to the cloud? Like, what any of those
Yeah,
happened?
yeah, I think so. I mean, the biggest hesitation was the loss of control, and I
Okay.
think over time, in the kind of the early part of when a lot of people did start to consider the cloud, it was their perception of the loss of control. We talked a little earlier about the missing features. There are things that you can do with SharePoint on premises that for a while you couldn't do in the cloud. But that changed over time, and that was a big push. So if you were starting to think about the cloud as a customer, and
Yeah.
you think you hear the track record, Microsoft is working on making it better in the cloud and adding features and growing and all of that. So if you take that aside, there was the initial hesitancy of, is it good enough in the cloud? Then there's all the concerns around security, privacy, uptime, reliability. That also got better. And to be honest, that's one of the hidden gems of the cloud is how robust these services are
Mhm.
now. They're amazing teams that work on them. I got pretty closely with the SharePoint infrastructure team, which ran basically, if you think about in the old on-premises days, it was how many farms did you have within your company? Now it's
Mhm.
just, I don't even want to say it's thousands, if not millions, but whatever the number is, it's
Oh,
it's so much, but so interconnected in terms of how they manage it, monitor it, keep secure, keep it isolated. So it's a pretty big uplift to get the true SharePoint Online infrastructure. And there's really some nice information that team has put out over the years. Um, but I think the other part is just the nature of how to get to the cloud and what is the impetus to do it. It was a big project to get a company in whatever state they were in to get them into the cloud. It's a migration, or it's a lift and shift, or it's you name different ways of getting to the cloud, but it was that the ability to commit to it. I don't think it was just for the light at heart, or the faint of heart. Um,
huh.
but over time, some of those processes got better. How do you actually get to the cloud? And having that made that decision, as a customer, and I can remember it was right around, at least from the way I remember it, around 2014 or 2015, kind of right before the modern SharePoint era, but the cloud is already starting to mature. And I think there was fewer conversations that I was in where people were asking about, should we move to the cloud? And the
Okay.
conversation shifted where it was, we're now in the cloud. What should we do next? What workload should we take advantage of? And, what it is that we can then further turn off on premises. And in SharePoint, that was file servers, SharePoint on premises, maybe
Mhm.
competing technology where they could consolidate. And, those are other bigger projects to be considered. But I think once we hit around 2014, 2015, it was not an if statement, it was a when, and it
When
went beyond the
statement. Yeah.
how. It became when and
Oh.
what next.
So basically, cloud just became inevitable, and everyone just got completely lured towards it.
Yeah, I think it was easier to log into. It
Yeah.
it it ran better because the reliability, once it was really good, stayed really good. So, over time, the downtime compared to when you were running it yourself was very different. And the fact that the role of IT, which was, I think, a little scary in those early days, where people were asking themselves, "Well, now what do I do?" And it's now it's more. I'm really glad I don't have to do any of that anymore. Managing the server, managing the uptime. Oh,
Yeah.
something goes really, really wrong. Now it's your job to get it back online. Now the
Yeah.
onus is on Microsoft, or if you're a competitor customer, it's their onus. You're kind of paying somebody to keep the lights on, in addition to having really cool features and products.
That completely sums up my my question on that. Now, Mark, in your experience, I just wanted to understand like how important are these Microsoft 365 apps like Microsoft Teams, lists, and loops that are actually integral and crucial for the for the tech space.
Yeah, I think they're foundational. It's sort of if you were to ask this question, 3 or 4 years ago, there'd be a little nuance to the answer. But at its core, things like SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, certainly on the other side of the spectrum from a solution perspective, the Power Platform in general, they're very foundational to where and how you do your work. SharePoint kind of gets a unique role where it gets to be an app and a platform. But I think also Teams is similar to that. It's a great place to do like what we're doing, have a one-on-one phone
Exactly.
chat, record
Yeah.
the meeting, or have a webinar or do a town hall. But it's also a great place where you can collaborate and you can chat and you can do things asynchronously. And similar to SharePoint, Teams does a lot, right? Um, but it doesn't do it in isolation. And it doesn't really, it also means SharePoint doesn't work in isolation. And the two complement each other because not only are they integrated, but it's kind of the how people work. We're going to meet. Our meeting recording needs to be available. That happens to get put into SharePoint.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of the way that it's engineered. They're interconnected, but the individual applications play those very distinct roles. Whereas that horizontal offering, which is Microsoft 365, is I'm Mark and I sign in, and now I can get my email and my calendar. I can chat with a colleague. I can look at a document, add it to it, send it as a link. And then with things like you mentioned, lists and loop, now I'm just maybe managing very specific type of information or in a very specific way where I love loop because, it really is by design, it's meant to be during the collaborative portion of a life cycle, not final messaging or information. But it's lightweight, it's easy to share, it's stored in SharePoint. That's part of the why it has that connection. But the user interface is wherever you are. You're either in the Loop app or you're in a Teams chat or you're in an email, and it is the same file. If at the end of the day it's just a .loop file,
Dot
but
loop file.
the ease of how you can manage a list or bulleted information or
Mhm.
a paragraph or a table of information, whatever your loop component is, um, it has a real distinct purpose. So as you get up higher, like into the
Yeah.
application layer, it's pretty straightforward. I check my mail in Outlook. I go to the SharePoint site because that's where somebody built out the giving campaign or whatever. Um, but at the foundation, when you think of things like Office 365, now Microsoft 365, it's just a big packaging, but for more and more over time, it gets to be more of an integrated experience. And I think it all starts with when you sign into the service, A, what do you have access to? That's kind of a licensing thing. But then it really is you and how you work with your colleagues and what you're working on. And, as private as maybe one project needs to be, you could also have a very public, not public to the world, but public within your company, a space where you can work openly, and right next to it, a space that you could work very privately until it's time to, broaden it out and share all the good news.
That's amazing, Mark. Now, Mark, the best thing that what I like about the Microsoft 365, especially from the terms of, Teams, is that transcripts. Whenever something gets recorded, you have a
Hmm.
transcript because sometimes what happens is suppose you're looking at the meeting and certain people are not able to understand it. So if they look at the transcript, they're like, okay, like this was the exact point that we mentioned. So I feel, that's a very good feature that has been added to the team site.
I agree. I think Microsoft Teams in general is a great reference to what did we talk about and
Yeah.
being able to get back to it. Obviously, it's a big thing to remember, record the meeting. And now they have the option where you can just record the transcript. Some of that is to go exactly what you just said, to be able to get back to something, to be able to copy paste, here's the information that somebody shared with me and not have to go back to the person and ask him again. What did you say? I don't remember what you said.
Yeah.
And it plays a big role in now Copilot. This is not a surprise to most people, but
Yeah. Yeah.
if I go and ask Copilot, what did Aknil and I talk about? It'll give me a summary of everything that we talked about. If I have a really distinct question, when Akhil asked me about, Microsoft Loop, what did I say? And it'll give me that.
Yeah.
And I actually used it the other day. I was in a meeting that was being recorded,
Okay.
and I was listening, but I think I just didn't quite hear exactly the name that they said. And it
Hmm.
was somebody's name, so I won't say it, but I basically asked Copilot, who did so and so say was the lead of this particular company that we're working with? And it just came right back and said, this person said it was so and so. And that was it. And it was because the meeting was being recorded, and all of that information gets, some of it gets stored in SharePoint and then is easily referenceable within the meeting because the team's team has done a really nice job with the user interface for the
Yep.
team's recap. If you ever go into that post meeting, say you
Hmm.
never attend the meeting, then it's like gold because you can ask it a whole bunch of questions. But the
Exactly.
actual Teams meeting file gets recorded, is in SharePoint for a period of time,
Hmm.
depending on your choice, and then
Yeah.
it's available to anybody who has access to it. So if you're a person from the meeting, you can go back into Teams, but it's also just a part of SharePoint. You can just do a broader search, and what comes up might be the team meeting. And when you load it within the right context, you'll be able to derive information from it and hopefully find the thing that you're looking for. And the trick there is to be able to find it within the context and faster. So, not just doing a broad search because you can search for everything at any time, but if you know a good place to start or what you're going to ask Copilot if you're using Copilot, it navigates that. But the content is kind of important to have. And to your point, if you
Yep.
record it, then you have this great new content asset that will serve you well until you don't need it anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good, interesting insight on that, Mark. Now, Mark, like I wanted to understand, like what was your drive and inspiration to come up with your own company,
Hmm.
Cashbox LLC, and is there any interesting backstory that is associated with the inception of that?
Yeah, so I'll start it off with the sad news, which wouldn't be a surprise if people know who I am, but I'll start there because of your question. But the Cashbox LLC was because I was laid off from Microsoft. So after 20 years,
Oh,
it
okay.
happens, and I was a part of a layoff. It's not to be sad. I've shared it publicly, and it's just a reality. But that was the real impetus to your question. But it is
Mhm.
also something that gave me the ability to do a lot of things that I wanted to do, and now trying to reinvent myself or think about what it is that I'm going to, after I've been doing everything we've been talking about for 20 years, what do I then do? Do I not do anything in the tech space? Maybe I become a forest ranger. That was a thought. Maybe I'll become a writer. I was interested in writing. I like to write children's books and short science fiction stories. So I
Beautiful.
had a little bit
Yeah.
of a plan to do a little bit of everything. But I kind of missed the community aspect of it and just being a part of, the kind of broader brain cell of making things work for people or helping people understand. And you're a part of it. I'm a part of it. It's a great community to be in, and I missed it. So I started talking to a number of people that had done their own thing, and some of them have been doing it for as long as I was at Microsoft. They were always their own sole proprietor. And so I looked into it, went through the hoops of getting a small business started. And I called it the Cashbox LLC because Cashbox was my nickname when I was growing up. Because my
Oh.
last name, Kashman, I can't remember. I think one of my teachers called me Cashbox, and then all of my
Oh.
peers, that's what they called me. So that's the name. And you said it a little bit earlier, but I was having a little bit of fun with what is my title? I get to choose my title because it's just me. So I called myself the Chief Extra Zone Officer. And
Hmm.
because my podcast was called The Intrazone, now I'm in the post Microsoft era of my career. I went from the Intrazone to the Extra Zone. So I was having a little fun with that. But the very last part of the answer is it just gave me a way so that I could say yes to taking on new projects, get paid for them in a way where people could pay Cashbox, not me directly, and that I could be a clean entity going forward. And as it turns out, that was really just for about 6 months. I'll probably still do a few projects underneath the Cashbox LLC umbrella. But now the new umbrella is being a part of the Sympraxis Consulting team, and
Okay.
they encourage the ability to be plugged into the community, to do good work with customers directly, and also the flexibility of doing your own thing within the amount of hours that you have during the day.
Awesome. That's pretty good to know. Now, when you just, before, the, Cashbox LLC company even, evolved, or before you got that thought, did you ever have that feeling, you wanted to go back to television again, since you
Mhm.
had background in that?
Always. I think my worst trait, but it's not a negative one, is I always feel like I'm an armchair director or an armchair screenwriter. And all that means is I watch a show and I go, oh, what if they did this? Or oh, they could have said that. And sometimes it's goofy, and I'm not saying it's better writing or better directing. But just to have that mindset, I did a little bit of directing on really small. I did a web series with a friend of mine, and he and I were kind of co-directors, and it was really fun. Um, and on the writing side, just the going from an idea in your head to then seeing how other people, if you're not the director, you're the writer, to see how they make your writing come to life, and seeing that production in general, whether it was big or small, was always fascinating to me. To
Yeah.
go from essentially an idea, a written script, to then filming it, the on set. If you've never been on a production set, it's not for everybody. But I think there's something kind of magical about it, and people working
Yeah.
together, and it's usually for a very short period of time, and then the product comes out, and then you move on. But I got to work on some fun TV shows and a couple of movies, and getting back to that, I have one good friend who was gonna, bring me on as a little bit of a day hire, and
Hmm.
I was looking forward to that. But I also, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't quite ready to let technology go, so
Yeah.
it won it out. But the writing part of it, you can always do that no matter what, and so that I still dabble in the writing, even though sometimes it's hard to find a little time to do it.
Yeah. That completely gives me an idea on that. Now, Mark, like, would you like to mention out that web series that you worked on, because I would like to check it out if possible.
Oh yeah, well, the unfortunate part, it was so long ago that it's no longer online, even though it was an online web series.
Oh,
So
okay.
I will tell you, it was called Unfiltered, and
Hmm.
we were brought on by the Washington State Health Department to
Okay.
basically film and produce six episodes of web series that was working with teenagers who were trying to quit smoking. So at the
Hmm.
time, the my buddy and I, who we had worked together, we had just worked on The Real World. And if you know The Real World, it's a reality TV series that's, I don't know how many seasons has been out now, but we worked on season 7 when it was in Seattle. And we pitched the idea of having a reality based, but a real, a kind of a useful web series to help teenagers that were having trouble quitting smoking. And so we went through, and all the episodes were about how to quit smoking, talking with a counselor, taking them to see what your lungs looked like afterwards. And we just got to be the film crew that tagged along, and then we
Hmm.
edited them everything together. So for a little bit, it was online. Now it's on a VCR down in my basement. And
In the VCR still.
well, it's yeah, that's how old it was. So we made ourselves a copy of each episode on VHS tape, and so to show you and point to it would be really hard. But for a while, it was for the state of Washington. It was a primary, health offering that they showed in a variety of the different schools to anybody, not just people who smoke, to hopefully keep people from smoking. That was the goal.
All right. That was a beautiful initiative. I mean, hats off for that.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So now I just wanted to understand, Mark, if you would, like to give me an insight on your current experience of, working with various consulting firms through your company, Cashbox LLC. Like, then how would you, try to, explain that?
Yeah, I think as I switched my hat, going from KashBox LLC to then now working with Sympraxis Consulting, it was just that. That was my first really step into working with a consulting firm in my new, kind of post Microsoft career. A lot of it was, I have a lot of information that I've learned over the years, and there are a lot of things that, I can help guide customers into making good choices and how they configure SharePoint, thinking about their information architecture, and, just a basic design. You want something to be user friendly and well thought out. And part of my storytelling past is to be able to bring that in internally. You have a new initiative, and you need to sell the people on it. You can create a site that has whatever on it, but it needs to be compelling. So some of that, working with these different vendors, and now a little bit more firsthand, It was just that coming to the consensus of what is the customer trying to do? What is it that I can offer? And maybe who do I need to bring in so that it's a holistic view of the project? A lot of the people that I now work with, my specialty is SharePoint and the user interface and the adoption and some of the design and coaching. But I also work pretty closely with SharePoint developers, SharePoint architects that are really deeper level, where people are going to be using PowerShell and doing things with scripts. That's a little bit out of my comfort zone. So some of it is just learning who knows how to do what. And back to your really early question, the broader ecosystem, the one side that we didn't really talk too much about was the software systems integrators, the SIs. So ISVs build product and the SIs help implement it. And so seeing a lot of the strength within the ecosystem of people who know what they're doing, know how to understand where is the customer and where do they want to go, and then relying on be able to pull in the right people. There are so many talented people out there, and it doesn't have to be within Seattle. It's across the world. And knowing when to pull in a specialist for Power BI, because the team I'm now on, we don't have a Power BI expert, but we have a really good connection to a Power BI expert. So knowing when to make the call and say, "Hey, we need your help." I think that's a big part of it. The ecosystem is really broad with a lot of talented people, and sometimes you have to also realize the customer is also very talented in what they do, but they need help with the technology because they're not, and there's no intention of them being a technology expert to the level of what you and I might consider our expertise is.
Yeah.
They know, like I'm working with a company now, they work in the healthcare industry and they're experts about the products that they make with a lot of stuff that goes into your eye to help your eyes to see and feel better. I know none of that, but I can help them with their process when they go from the instance of a new project all the way through to shipping their product. They articulate the business process and we're helping support what does that project site look like and what does it need to do. And it's a great partnership. So that's, working with customers, working with partners, working of course with my immediate team. And when I was on my own for the little bit of time where I had a few projects, they were really more oriented around coaching and training and focusing on the adoption of technology. But still back to there's something that somebody doesn't know. I happen to know it. And for a period of time, I helped them get a little bit more knowledgeable. And all the while, I also learned from them things that maybe I didn't know that I then researched and made sure I would know about, or just about their business. So I got to learn a little bit more about each customer that you work with. You learn a little something
Yep.
about the world, which is always really fun.
That's fantastic, Mark. Now, Mark, according to you, in your experience, like, and since you have just told me that you work for multiple consulting firms, like, which sector of the consulting firms do you think that SharePoint is very much like on the most applicable for?
Mm. I think the sort of if I were still working at Microsoft, and I still think it's true, they would say they're really very horizontal. There isn't a specific vertical because they have customers in every industry, whether it's healthcare, financial, legal firms, of course, retail, and there's so many pharma and whatnot. I think it's more the what each industry is trying to accomplish. If you look at what SharePoint offers, it offers a very different type of site experience to a law firm because they're storing their matter, their documents, their
Mhm.
procedures and policies. But then you go to the media and entertainment industry, like we were talking about, they're managing really large video files and lots of
Hmm.
images, and of course, all the scripts and all their connections and contacts. And, but there are a lot of things that everybody does, even if their use case is a little bit different. So I wouldn't want to pinpoint too much which industry is the
Okay.
primary focus. If you look at the data, it's probably retail because there's just a lot of retail customers out there.
Yep.
But the successes are pretty much throughout every industry. And some of the really large use cases that have been published from a evidence perspective, some of those are really, really large healthcare firms. There's the Home Depot, I think, has been one of the big evidence cases in the past. Coca-Cola, there's a lot, and Microsoft is such a big company that they have so many customers, big and small, and they're doing sometimes using everything, and sometimes they're just using,
Huh.
Exchange and Teams.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd have to be honest because it's such a big company and so widespread. It's
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
every industry,
Yep. Yep.
but it is always you always have to ask the question. Even if it is a different industry, what are you trying to accomplish? And there usually is an answer or a role for SharePoint to play. And of course, some of the product offerings are pretty agnostic. You need to have meetings and chat. That's
Yep.
Teams. You need to have email and calendar. That's Exchange and Outlook. There's a lot that every company, is going to probably use those two things. And now
Okay.
with Copilot, being the front door and how people get, if they're adopting it, how they get at things, but it doesn't erode the need for, really good managed content.
That's brilliant, Mark. That gives me an idea about how the sector and how things focus. And really, I love the way you told me about it's a horizontal approach, not a vertical approach, and everything has to be like that.
Yeah, I think over time they tried a lot of things with different templates, so or even different solutions. There was a particular solution that was built. It was called the Matter Center, and it was built within Microsoft Word with the reality that the document was stored in SharePoint. But Microsoft Word was the front end with this solution on top of it, and it was designed just for legal firms
Hmm.
because of how they manage their what they call matter, the documents within a case. Um, but on top of that, there were some specific list templates that were
Yep.
designed for certain verticals. There was a lot of site templates that were designed for different verticals. Over time, there's always been a lot of effort for specific solutions. Some, like I even mentioned, the interactive media manager,
Yeah.
that team wasn't on the SharePoint team, but at the time they definitely claimed it as a media and entertainment offering
Okay.
because it was a solution built on top of SharePoint and it helped the business at the time.
That's brilliant, Mark. Now, Mark, before we actually take a closer, let's say a conclusion for our podcast session. I
Mhm.
mean, we'll take a pretty lighter route in the form of a rapid fire round. All this while, I was bombarding you with the questions of your IT journey, about your experience in Microsoft for 20 years, and then about all those interesting anecdotes about your rendezvous with Mr. Bill Gates. Now, I'll just go to a very lighter route, talking about your likes and interests. So the very first question for you in the rapid fire round.
Ready.
Yeah. All right, Mark. So, like, what is your favorite sports team? Then, what would that be?
I'd have to say it's now pretty local. It's the Seattle Sounders, and that is the
Okay.
local soccer team, which I
Yeah,
know in
yeah.
the rest of the world, it's the local football team, FUTBAL. But I grew up playing soccer and I just love watching soccer. And turns out the Seattle Sounders most years are pretty good.
Yeah, they're a pretty good team. I mean, I'm not much into the MLS, but I've heard a lot of things because I saw the FIFA Club World Cup, and they were fine, but just got knocked out very quick.
Yeah, I think when the World Cup comes to America in a little bit, there will be a different level of soccer being played. But to be
Yeah.
honest, I think some of our team members, and of course throughout MLS, they will be playing for their local country teams, and it'll be fun to see them playing at that level of soccer, which is the World Cup. And we'll see how far everybody gets. And I hope some of the Sounders players who will
Yeah.
play in the World Cup will make it really far. But at the end of the day, I will always be a Sounders fan.
That's amazing, Mark. Now, Mark, I just wanted to know, like, what is your favorite TV show? Let's say American sitcom. Like, before I ask you that, I always have this feeling since I don't come from the 70s or 80s time. I'm a 90s person.
Hmm?
But whenever I see the opening credits of the American sitcoms, I don't know. I just go into a different feel. I feel, it has that particular vibe, which I don't see it coming now.
Yeah, I think the intros have changed a lot. So,
Yeah.
and of course, a lot of the writing has changed, and and just thinking of American television, but I think so much of what a lot of what, if I can classify Americans as watching anything beyond America, which is very true. There's a lot of British TV. There's a lot of Korean TV.
Mhm.
Um, and there's been a couple of different ones. One of my recent favorites is a show that came out of Germany called Dark, Dark,
Yeah, Duck. Yeah.
and it was a really interesting, kind of darker, as it's implied, take on science fiction. And time travel and ways of playing with your head where sometimes you have no idea what's going on, but they had really interesting ways of telling stories. And you have to be patient, I think, anytime where there's subtitles because I don't speak German. But I thought all around it was really well acted, had great cinematography, but
Mhm.
the story was the key where it was just sort of I
Yeah.
didn't know what to expect, and I was hooked. People, you hear
Awesome.
about it like, oh, you got to see Dark. It's really
Yeah.
it's kind of a head trip.
It
And
is.
it
It is.
was.
Yeah.
And I think just to contrast it, since you mentioned what era, I was born in the 70s and probably really
Ah.
started to remember and watch TV around, age 12 or whatever. So that would have been into the 80s. I
Yeah.
used to be a really big fan of the Hulk.
Okay.
Still am a fan of the character, no matter what. But the
Yeah.
Hulk television series, and then in that same time era, there was two shows that were just they're really goofy if you go and watch them now. But one of them was called The $6 Million Man, and then
Mhm.
there was The $6 Million Woman. It was basically the introduction of a bionic element of a human. I can't remember all the differences they had, but I think he had
Yeah.
they were able to do superhuman things, but they're not superheroes. So it was kind of that
It
space where
was
they could jump
interesting. Yeah.
really high or lift big things, or they had a electronic eye, and it was kind of fascinating TV. But the Hulk, when he turned from David Banner into the Hulk, even back then, it was really rudimentary the way that they did it. But it was, I was hooked. I was hooked.
That was like true nostalgia, I would say, Mark. Then.
A little bit, yeah. Well, don't make me angry. You'll see what happens. That's
Yeah.
that's the Hulk's little, you won't like me when I'm angry. And yeah, I saw that for the first time at age whatever I was, 12 or 15 or something.
That's perfect, Mark. Now, Mark, if I would just like to ask you, like, what is your favorite holiday destination? What would you name it?
Yeah, so I've been a lot of places for both work and life. My mom used to take us traveling about every 2 or 3 years to some big destination. And the one that sticks out, even though, of course, the whole world is pretty fascinating, is we went to Thailand one time and we landed in Bangkok, but then we went to a little island not too far away, but took a little rickety boat, all of our luggage and loaded in. And it was I have two older sisters, and we all traveled together. And we also met up with a friend of my sister's who at the time I was probably 16 or 17. I used to also like to rock climb. And my sister's friend was also traveling in Thailand, and he had brought all his climbing gear in addition to stuff that I could use. So it was memorable for a lot of reasons. It was great
Okay.
family time, great swimming. The water was warm. It's beautiful. But also, we took one of these boats that was just meant to get you from little island to island, and we actually stepped right off of the boat onto the rock, and went up a couple hundred feet. And then when we rappelled all the way down, we rappelled all the way down right into the boat. So
Mhm.
it was magical. And the climbing was really good. And of course, then after climbing for a half a day, the food was really good. We had traditional pad thai that was, right off the beach. It
Yeah.
was it was really fun. So I would
Yeah.
love to get back to Thailand. And that's not to say that I haven't been to a lot of other great places around the world. But to your question, I'd have to say Thailand for sure.
Thailand. That's a unique choice. Now, since Mark, I'm Indian, I'm very inquisitive to ask you this question. Like, what is your favorite Indian food? No
Indian food. I don't
problem.
know if I know Indian food quite as well, but I do know. Okay, back to Indian food. Um, Gosh, maybe you can give me a few dishes, and I know that I've had some good naan bread and some
Naan
good,
bread, yeah.
of course, but I think anything my spice level I need to be about mid spice.
With
So
spice, okay.
anything with lamb, I love lamb. But maybe you can give me a rapid fire, like name a dish, and I'll tell you if I've had it and if I liked it.
Surely. Then I think that'll be interesting. So have you had this dish called palak paneer? It's like, a spinach gravy which has the
Oh yeah.
cottage cheese.
Yeah, it's green in color. It's delicious. Yeah, that is like a perfect dish to scoop up with the naan bread
Yeah, yeah.
for
And
sure.
have you, tried, this one, like, what do I say that something called chole? It's like, a chickpea kind of a thing,
Yep,
chickpeas.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say, and this will be a little bit of a cheat, but when I go to the local grocery store for me is called Trader Joe's,
Okay.
and Trader Joe's has a lot of the Indian food that's in the packets, and then I usually add it to rice or I put it on some good bread. And I think I usually get one that's pretty spicy with a lot of uh, potato chunks in it.
Hmm.
And I forget what it's called. I should run downstairs and just get it.
Hmm.
Um, but the
Okay.
sag paneer that you mentioned, so there's about
Okay.
three that I often get. And anyway, it's a quick, easy way, to make dinner, but it's
Okay.
pretty common because they make it easy for you.
Awesome. I think when you're talking about the potato chunks, I think you're talking about the filling, right? I think you're talking
Yep.
about samosas.
Yeah, it's just like I think it's potato, but
Hmm.
it has, of course, a lot of different spices, and the best part about it is at some point, you start getting a little bit of the sweat on the brow. And actually there was a really great Indian restaurant that was during COVID. Now I think they have a real restaurant. They started cooking food to go out of their home, and so it was called Mommy's, and it was just down the street. You put in your order and picked it up. So during COVID, that was, a number of years ago now, but both my kids were at home. And so we would, definitely go out and from Mommy's get a nice, to go. And
Hmm.
oftentimes I had to gauge, my son likes it a little bit spicy, but you
Okay.
end up trying a little bit of everybody's. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would take a little bit of his, and again, the little sweat on the brow,
That's
and
happening over here.
more bread and more water.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. I mean, yep. I mean, sometimes, there are certain foods in India for us, region by region it changes. And some foods are even, spicy for us to even, consume.
I
And
bet.
yeah, absolutely.
What is your favorite? Both, since I answered Thai and Indian food, what's your favorite Thai and what's your favorite Indian dish?
My favorite Thai food is pad Thai, and I've tried pad Thai in Singapore once when I just went out with my cousin.
Hmm.
And Indian food always happens to be. I have multiple things. I come from the south of India, so I like a dish called dosa, which
Oh
you people
yeah,
like. Yeah,
for
the
sure.
dosa. And then I like a lot of North Indian food, probably palak paneer, some of let's say a naan, roti. So
Hmm.
that's my go-to thing.
That's nice. And I'm assuming everywhere in the world you can get good Indian food, but do you have any food that you haven't been able to get for a while since you're no longer in?
I mean, it's like, when you talk about Indian food, right? It's not like every menu, everything on, every region has that on the menu. It's like selected food items and few things we have to, even find out once we, go through each place. So it's region by region, right? So the food changes and sometimes we're like, okay, we didn't get this. But yeah, we just get used to it.
Yeah, I'm sure you get used to it, but and do you still go back to India where you maybe, when you're back, if you have relatives or family still in India?
Yes, yes. I mean, my family is based in Hyderabad and I'm doing my master's course here. So I'm, yeah, away from home.
Oh, that's great. Well, I hope you get back so that you can get the food that you like, but it's also nice. It's usually not too hard to find Indian food, but also maybe the challenge is finding good Indian food.
Good Indian food, yeah, yeah. I mean, the Indian
Yeah.
food, if I would rate in Australia, it's like let's say 7.5 or 8 out of 10. I don't say I don't would I wouldn't give it as 9.5 or 10,
Yeah.
but it's fine.
Yeah.
It's manageable.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah. All right. Then the final question to you, Mark. So, what was the last song that you have heard?
The last song that I heard, well, it's by an artist that I really like. His name is Dan Deacon,
Okay.
Deacon, and he often does a lot of the soundtracks for movies and television. And the latest TV show that we're watching is called Task, Task, and it's a good, kind of the whodunit FBI type show.
Oh,
And
okay.
he did the soundtrack for it. And one of the main, I think one of the main songs is called Coin, Coin. But he's really good. It's electronic music, and it's obviously very situational because it's a soundtrack versus a song. And so that's what I was just listening to this afternoon, getting a little work done to Dan Deacon and
Yeah.
trying to replay a little bit of the soundtrack because we just watched a couple episodes last night.
That's perfect, Mark. So, Mark, finally, thank you so much, for taking time and being part of my podcast initiative. The more you were talking about your experience, I was completely hooked, and I was like, no, I want to ask this question to Mark and make it much more insightful. But really, I was completely blown off by every conversation that we had, especially about your tenure in Microsoft, that 20-year tenure you had there, and how you have created your company, and how you're able to build that together, and then your entire timeline. So that was very catchy, and especially not to mention about SharePoint, which was like the
Yeah.
A cherry on the top.
Yeah, I feel like I might actually need to change my name, which is Mark, that guy who was on SharePoint team for a while, Kashman. That's going to be my new name. But thank you for having me on. It's really great that you're starting and continuing this podcast. I'm honored to have been that you reached out and got to be a part of this episode, and certainly, hopefully, sharing a little bit of the things that I've done in the last 20 years were interesting and maybe helpful for people to consider what it is that they might want to do next with SharePoint.
Absolutely. I mean, when our listeners are going to hear about it, and if they have certain questions about SharePoint, probably they'll come back to you and they'll say, I hope, if that happens, I'll be the most happiest person.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, if they come to you or me, I will let you know. And certainly, I'm always available to take questions if people have or if people want to share their own stories. It's always fascinating to hear what people are doing in the tech space. But thank you for
Yeah,
the time and
yeah.
congratulations on your show.
Thank you so much, Mark. So, listeners, listeners, on this note, this is your host Akhil Navluri signing off. We will be back with another podcast episode with another eminent industry leader very soon. Till then, keep listening, stay tuned, goodbye, thank you, and au revoir. Thank you.